make sure you hit subscribe. It's right over there, I swear. Or maybe it's there. It's one of them. It's a button. It's red. Click it. You know, the NFL a couple of years ago, Dan, they agreed to this process because they had so clumsily handled suspensions. And so you get an independent arbiter. They come in, they render a decision. You can appeal it. It feels very, very light to me. And I think perception now, Roger Goodell has to, in my opinion, double it. Or I think the NFL is going to get harshly criticized. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought he was in for a year. I thought that was going to be a year. I was stunned at how light it was. And here in New England, we've been down the path of Roger Goodell doing whatever he wants. So this might be a time to him to bring down the ginger hammer, as it were. So I don't know, but I don't see that thing staying at 6. 6 feels too light to me.
Well, you know, in so much of this, listen, everybody on social media simplifies it, but the reality is this is Sue Robinson's decision, not Roger Goodell's.
Right.
And, you know, perception for a commissioner, I mean, you saw Rob Manfred get clobbered throughout the All-Star game for just slight comments that feel off tone or, you know, missing the mark, not reading the temperature in the room. My feeling has always been commissioners and bosses and executives don't get in trouble, Dan, when they're overly punitive.
Right.
And so to me, if I was Roger Goodell, just to protect the league and to protect the brand, I would triple it. And if the NFLPA wants to sue it, that would just make more sense to me.
I'm with you. What's the harm? At least he looks strong in that point and probably giving America what it wants. And, you know, it feels like this is insulting to a lot of people, especially the women of America. And, you know, not all those women were lying. No one's buying that. So it looks light. And given other things that have been done for lesser transgressions, certainly, yeah, he looks better if he goes with the hammer here, even if he can't uphold it, which generally he can.
So Bill Russell, I grew up in Seattle. So Bill Russell was a sonic broadcaster, was a big part of the Northwest, retired in Mercer Island. We knew his story very well. As Boston and Seattle probably knew Bill's story as well as anybody. Always dignified. The words that came to my mind when I heard of his passing: dignified, defiant, uncompromising, strength, values, racism, obviously what he dealt with. So let's go back to the beginning of your career when I imagine you dealt with him more often. He was a fairly uncompromising guy. Now that we know his life story, we understand that. What he was going through is just unimaginable today. How was your relationship in the times you dealt with him?
Well, I mean, I grew up in New England. I grew up playing basketball. He was a god to us, and we were so lucky to have that kind of a team here. All these Hall of Famers who were secure in their own greatness. And it was great for teachers and parents to have this role modeling of a team that, you know, put team above self, and they weren't about statistics. They never had a scoring champ, and Russell would block the shot and not swat it into the seats. He would control the block and run the fast break and you know, match up with Wilt Chamberlain, all this stuff. They were a model team that we learned how to play the game correctly. And it was great to have a winning team in our midst, because the Bruins, Patriots, and Red Sox weren't very good when I was a young person. Come into this professionally as a sports writer, Bill Russell's daunting. He doesn't suffer fools. He doesn't give any quarter. He experienced racism here. He was right. I was a reader, so I read Go Up the Glory. I read Second Wind, you know, Diary of an Opinionated Man with Taylor Branch. And Bill Russell, it bothered me as a sports writer that this guy is not only a great athlete, he's a better writer than we are. So we always hate that, but he could do that too, because he was an intellect and he was smart and he could outsmart the opposition and win that way. Professionally, Colin, we had him around. You just didn't know which guy you were going to get. Blows hot and cold, and there would be a force field around him, a do not disturb sign metaphorically hanging around his neck, and you didn't go there if it was one of those times. There were occasions when he was, I don't know, trying to get into heaven, or his daughter had gone to Harvard, was involved in a mentoring program. He was very supportive of that. He would come around and do favors for her with us, which would give us access. He came to the Boston Globe executive dining room one time, and he was storytelling. It was like he would do with his teammates, because he was trying to help out his daughter. So he tolerated us fools for this day. We could ask him stuff. He was cackling, telling stories. He told me one, I use it every time. They were playing the Lakers, the Archie Clark Lakers, and it's a regular season game out there. And the Lakers have a 2-point lead in the ball with 10 seconds to go. And there's a timeout. So, of course, they know they're going to inbound, kill the clock. You'll have to foul them, whatever. And Russell says, no, I have a better idea. Archie Clark's in the game. He's the scorer. I know what he'll do if I create a path to the basket. He's going to go for 2 more points. So they come out of the timeout. Russell, creates a path to the basket. Archie Clark goes for the easy layup. Russell comes up, chase down, block. They get the ball back. They score. And the Celtics beat them in overtime. He took advantage of the mentality of the other team, knowing what the opposition was going to do. He noticed things. This was always part of it. So in the same day, when he was being all nice to us and everything, a regular guy, he apologized to me for the dozens of times he hadn't returned my phone calls or whatever when I was working on a book about our back. Because, Red was nice to me, and Red would say, I can get Russell to do this. No one could get Russell to do anything. He was going to do what he was going to do. I respected that. It was nice to have these little moments with him, but it was not a constant, hey, let's go around and shoot the breeze with Bill Russell. You took any moment you could get.
Well, I think there are similarities between him and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah.
Uncompromising, often viewed as prickly, but I don't think a guy like me has any understanding of their day-to-day living and the obstacles and, the racism they faced. Sure. And so it's easy from afar to say he was difficult, but boy, when you go back and look at history and what he dealt with, like I heard a story years ago that people were doing like top big men of all time, and Russell just wouldn't have it if he wasn't viewed as the best center of all time, because to him, winning was above everything else. Then nothing mattered. And so I do think there's an argument, like Wilt Chamberlain, who we find now is fairly close friends with Russell. Wilt was the statistical monster, but he was also a flake and often totally compromised. Do you remember? See, I don't as a kid. I missed the window. Do you remember the Wilt Russell matchups?
Absolutely. It was the greatest one-on-one matchup we ever saw because of the athleticism of the two guys, the identities of the two guys. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain's averaging 50 points a game. The only people that have ever had 3 consecutive MVP seasons in the NBA are Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, and Larry Bird. No one else has done 3 in a row. Look it up. It's a weird stat. Go back and look at the last time they played in '69. Wilt had the better team. Russell finished 4th. And Wilt's got Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, and Russell's got Emmett Bryant. He had Havlicek. But the Lakers were supposed to win. It was Game 7 in the Forum, and the 4th place Celtic team beat them yet again. Wilt didn't want to foul out. Asked out of the game. Ben Bredikoff wouldn't put him back in the game. Wilt ends up sulking on the bench, and Russell wins another championship with an inferior team. That's how it ended for the two of them. Wilt was a great guy, easy guy for us, wanted to please, gregarious, all that stuff. Russell wasn't that guy, but they would get together, and Wilt's mother would make them both dinner when Russell would go to Philadelphia and all this stuff, and they got along fabulously. And just look at the athleticism of Wilt Chamberlain. He's like a LeBron James, 7'1", and couldn't put it to the floor like that, but everything else, he was a crazy down there, the muscular and the speed and the power. And Russell was able to neutralize that. Let Wilt have his thing. We'll win the championships.
The Boston Mount Rushmore is remarkable. Bill Russell, Ted Williams, Tom Brady, and Bobby Orr. I mean, Larry Bird doesn't make the mountain. Nope. Isn't that remarkable?
Nope. It's true. I mean, you can make a case best in every sport. I mean, I think Orr is. And Russell clearly is the best winner. Ted could be the greatest hitter. Brady, that's kind of hard to dispute. So it's really, we're pretty proud of that. And Russell, because of the winning 13 years, 11 championships, he's really kind of a little cut above the others. And Tom, 6 Super Bowls is really hard to do in this era. We know that. But one thing the old guys will tell you, smaller league, 9 teams, hard to do then too, because there were good players on every team. You didn't have all these bums, these layups, 30 teams, whatever. It was a concentration of ability. Look at some of those teams with the Knicks and the Royals and the Lakers, of course. And, everybody was stacked. Knightley, Nate Thurmond, Willis Reed, Wilt Chamberlain. You got to go toe-to-toe with a good guy every night, and Russell did it.
Well, that's why I fell in love with the NBA in the 70s, and it's why I can still name the Sixers starting 5 and the Celtics starting 5, because everybody was competent. There were no just rotational guys. You had like 5 to 6 guys. I mean, I don't care if it's the Denver Nuggets and the Fat Lever Issel, Alex English. You look at how good those teams are, and they struggle to win playoff series because, like to your point, it wasn't as diluted as expansion
Correct.
has made all sports. I mean, we have 5 or 6 teams in baseball that are AAA baseball teams.
Oh my God.
Everybody in the world.
We need relegation, Colin.
So let's pivot to the Patriots. I remember years ago, I've used this example, Dan, that Warren Buffett obviously knows a lot more about investing than both of us. But investors, even legendary investors, make mistakes. And I remember about 12 years ago, he went into newspapers, big investment newspapers. And I remember thinking, listen, I read them and I love them. And I wanted to be a columnist as a kid. That ain't a great investment. Craigslist killed the classifieds, the urgency with telephones. They exist and they matter, and journalism will always have a profound place. It's probably not the best investment. And I say this because Bill Belichick, like Warren Buffett, knows more football than you and I'll ever know, right? But no coordinators. They have a recent history of poor drafting of offensive skill people. So this was presented to me, Dan, the other day, and I'll throw it at you, is that if you look at the last 7 games of New England's schedule this year, it is a gauntlet of Pro Bowl quarterbacks, 7 straight weeks. Bill looks at that and thinks we've got to really take advantage of the first 10 games on this schedule. And by not bringing in a coordinator, there is an element of surprise in September. And that now that we both kind of go, give me a break.
Yeah.
But Bill is nothing if not strategic. It's the only answer for me when people ask, why doesn't he have an offensive coordinator? That's the only thing that's been presented to me that makes sense. Do you have a better idea?
No, there's the possibility that there's some sort of pay structure thing where you can pay guys less because you don't give them these titles. They do think about these things. You wouldn't think they would, but they do. And more likely, it's that Bill's just stubborn and he's going to do things his way. I think he did some of this with the Browns, didn't work out really well 25, 30 years ago. And he's got 2 sons in the staff. I think there's a design to keep the heat off them a little bit. If you make Steven defensive coordinator or play caller of anything like that, it's more likely to come down on him. I think Bill's basically saying, I'll take the heat, I'll do it. And he will take the heat if they don't get out fast, because this is being, Bill's doing the usual obtuse answer to these questions. Like, why would you even ask that? When it's like, everybody would ask that. It's like, where are these guys? Why aren't you listing them as coordinators? So he's holding on to it in a very stubborn fashion. And, you point out the gauntlet at the end. The first 4 games aren't very easy for them either. So this has potential, and he's a little bit bulletproof because he's 70 years old and he's trying to catch Shula. He's got the resume. They did make the playoffs last year, but we know Buffalo's out of reach for them. It looks like Miami might have vaulted past them a little faster now. Miami beat them twice last year. So what's going on? How's this going to go if they don't get out faster? Will Bob Kraft ever actually put heat on this Hall of Fame coach he's got right in his yard here? So it's very intriguing, but what they don't have is a lot of really talented, great players. And we're not seeing it. And you look at the depth charts around the league and where they rank with any position on the field, it's not good.
Well, I read the Jeff Benedict, Ian O'Connor, Seth Wickersham books on the Patriots and Belichick. All 3 correctly acknowledged that Brady and Kraft were very tight. But I did feel in all 3 books that Kraft often tolerates Bill's snarkiness, kind of obtuse, cranky nature. And it sounds, counterintuitive to what you would think. But I've seen coaches, Andy Reid, fall out of favor after a 3-game losing streak. And I look at Bill and I think, this team goes in this division, Miami is better offensively. Right. Buffalo's the class of the league. Jets are better offensively. And we have a very clear pivot in this league to offense. Yes. The very good defensive coaches, Pete Carroll's struggling. Mike Zimmer fired. Brian Flores couldn't get along with a quarterback. Fangio. These are capable men. And I think to myself, what if they don't make the playoffs, Dan?
Ooh, I know they're on the bubble of that. When as going in, that's a legitimate question. That's a legitimate question going in. And I'm kind of a fallback because Bill is so superior to all the other coaches, and I still believe that. And maybe he's your guy buying newspapers. Maybe he's still reading newspapers. Maybe that's why I like him, because he's old school. But the notion that, you're going to go at it with linebackers who aren't that fast anymore, you're going to still play the ball like it was played in the 70s and 80s, maybe that's not working anymore. And in certain positions, wide receiver that you've never valued, you're going to have to value because the league has changed while you're there turning 70 years old, winning all these games, chasing Shula. So it makes it an intriguing plot line as we go in. How's this going to play out? The notion of he's not going to finish behind the Jets, that will never happen.
Right.
I mean, that would be, even he would sink his own boat if that happened. So I'm not saying you got to worry about that, but the rest of it's very real. And I think that he's put a big target on his back going in. And I think he just feels that he's got the resume and the gravitas to carry this.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Derek Jeter documentary, which I grew up 3,500 miles from that, but it all lands for me. All of it lands. And maybe because baseball is so rich in history and lore that looking back is more fun than actually watching current games sometimes, because the pace of it's so much better. I've always sort of rolled my eyes at the Derek Jeter's overrated vibe, and I'll tell you why. Because, and it really hit me when I went to a Yankee game, and I got there really, really early, and I didn't get a press pass. I went as a fan. I wanted to experience old Yankee Stadium. And it's still remarkable to me that there was no place to eat and watch the game at the same time. You had to go get food and then come back and watch it. Like every stadium now, you can have sushi down the third base line, right? You had to literally leave the field if it was a 3.5 hour, 4 hour game. So I'm watching it. And as I got there early, you could see the media around Jeter. The media was still, that's how early I got into the stadium. And I'm thinking, in Kansas City, there's four writers. Outside of maybe Boston or Los Angeles, the daily intensity to be a Yankee shortstop, the pressure, forget the Daily News, the New York Times. You're going to have ESPN. You're going to have Fox. You're going to have Dan Shaughnessy come into town if the Red Sox are in town. It was a beehive of activity around Jeter. Yet, and this is very rare, Ortiz falls into this too, is that Jeter was not only didn't dip in the postseason like an A-Rod or a Barry Bonds or a Clayton Kershaw. He was often better in crisis. Ortiz falls into that. Schilling often was that. When I hear the overrated thing, I just don't think people understand. He had an owner that literally was on him because he went out as a single guy in New York too often. Where did you land as a Red Sox in Red Sox Nation viewing Jeter for all those years?
Well, it was fun to watch him from where our distance was from afar. I mean, just across the room. I'd always make a point to go over there and just chat with him a little bit. He never said anything particularly interesting, as we know. Right. He was an extremely guarded guy. I understood that. You weren't going to have him light it up for you, but he was polite. He was respectful of the other side. And we had the thing with Nomar, because, you had A-Rod come in a little bit later, but Nomar and Jeter, and look at the career paths. Nomar was better. I mean, for those years, Nomar hit 370 in the big leagues. I mean, I don't know whether, he got too big or what happened or little injuries, whatever, but it went away fast for Nomar in 04. Jeter kept going, steer along 3,000 hits, championships, etc. So it changed. But in our town, there was the Nomar versus Jeter thing early on. So you had that. And Jeter, Nomar wasn't good with the media. He just didn't like it. And Jeter wasn't particularly interesting, but he was polite and cooperative. And he knew how to play that game and the drill. And he was legitimate captain leader. You can go back to that play against the Oakland A's. No one's ever going to forget that. And we had the epic night in New York when Nomar wouldn't play in the game in 04, and Jeter dives to the stands and breaks his face and comes off, and all that stuff happened. So it just, and again, being at the World Series in 2001 after the attacks, hits the home run, missed in November, all that stuff. I mean, I saw it all, and it was really impressive. And his last regular season game was in Boston as well. And he got an infield hit to knock in a run. He was just one of those guys. It was fun all the way. I haven't gotten into the dive of the program, the series you're talking about, but it doesn't surprise me. And I hope he can carry off all those parts, a lot of parts.
You had the well-heeled Red Sox, the, wallet is of no consequence Yankees. As I watched the series, I thought it feels like NFL Sundays watching these games. It literally captured the nation's attention over the National Football League, Dan. And I thought easily, and I thought, I don't think baseball ever gives us that again. I don't feel it. Those games and that documentary, I can remember it. It was bigger than the National Football League in those moments.
It was the biblical sports story. That whole thing really was. I mean, I saw it. I wrote The Curse of the Bambino. I had the whole 86 years leading up to that. What happened in 04, it was the only time Boston, and the fact that they did it at the expense of the Yanks, the 3-0 series lead in baseball, that's never happened in 120 years of 7-game series in baseball. It happened then with the two teams, and that was the winter. A-Rod had been a member of the Red Sox for a half hour. Then he ends up with the Yankees. Jeter won't move over. A-Rod plays third. All the stuff, Schilling with the bloody sock. Ortiz emerges as this cartoon character figure who can do all these things. They were like Sheffield's on the other side. I mean, people forget the greatness and the Hall of Famers and the 500 home run guys that were just Manny Ramirez. They were everywhere, and it was very real. And to go back and forth, I mean, the Red Sox, Grady Little got fired over that in 03. That's how Francona comes to Boston, just for letting Pedro go past 105 pitches with a 5-2 lead in the 8th inning in Yankee Stadium. Pedro saying the Yankees are my daddy. I mean, you cannot beat the characters we had and the stories that went into that. It just never stopped. And the 03, 04, 05 Red Sox Yankees, as good as it gets. I mean, don't even forget, after they won in 04, the next year, the first pitch of the Major League season was Randy Johnson pitching to Johnny Damon in Yankee Stadium. It was in a weapons, arms race. You just ratchet up, get another great guy to come in and join this thing. And it was a pleasure to have covered and to have watched. And you're right, you forget about it, then you go back and see some of that stuff, and it's like, did this really happen? What a thing.